it was warming up at the sidelines, and that was daunting, because as I warmed up the sidelines, to hear all this racial abuse, and I turned around expecting it to be the away supporters, found out it was my home supporters, and it was really hurtful. Being there, I got on for the last 4 minutes or what, but the 4 minutes was the longest 4 minutes I've ever come across, because I just wanted to get off as soon as possible, and doing so went straight down to the tunnel into the changing room, and I had hands in my head really, because I didn't know really whether I wanted to continue playing football again.
There's a history of racism in football. In the past, footballers highlighted how bad racism in society can be. The treatment of black footballers has reflected the attitudes towards black people throughout our society. But now, football's showing a way forward in the fight against racism. The first black professional footballer was Arthur Wharton, who played for Preston North End over 100 years ago. Many people thought he was good enough to play for England, but he was never considered for selection. This was a time when black people were considered inferior by many white Europeans. In the 1920s, one of the few black players was Jack Leslie, who became a prolific scorer with Plymouth Argyle. He was told by his manager that he'd been selected to play for England, but then the invitation to play for his country was withdrawn. Leslie told journalists, "They must have forgot I was a coloured boy." In the 1950s and 60s, many people from different ethnic backgrounds were encouraged to come and work in the UK. They suffered racist abuse and prejudice in many walks of life, including football. Many top clubs claimed black people would not make good footballers. It seems incredible that people thought like this then, but racial prejudice was part of everyday society. When clubs did begin to sign black players, these first black footballers suffered from terrible abuse from fans and from other players.
Monkey chanting, booing, even in its most extreme cases throwing up bananas. And obviously that was something that anybody would find difficult to actually deal with.
It was very, very common in the late 70s, early 80s to be racially abused by a large section of supporters.
Well, I mean, I had bananas thrown at me and been spat at, and I've had about 7,000 people at Ellen Road doing a Nazi salute at one end of the ground, which was at 17 years old, which was very scary. And at one point I thought that I wouldn't be a professional footballer, but I decided it's something that I really wanted to do, and it's something that I had to go through. In terms of having the banana thrown at me, what I used to do in the end was pick up the banana, peel it and eat it, and say thank you very much. And kind of just turn it around in that way and just show that I wasn't affected, because in those days you had to be stronger than that, because the mass majority of people didn't understand what you were going through, and you were the minority. So it's something you had to deal with.
In 1978, Viv Anderson became the first black player to win a full England international cap, followed soon after by Laurie Cunningham. Throughout the 1980s, John Barnes was a key player for England.
Barnes to his right, still Beardsley. Here's Barnes, real chance. Yes, John Barnes gets his second and England's third.
Racism was an accepted part of football, whereby, you know, if you got racial abuse, you had to put up with it, you have to take it. It showed that you had character. If you fought against it, you were told you had a chip on your shoulder. And the whole society accepted it, from the media to everyone.
Yeah, when I was a supporter, you'd go to the games, you know, you'd go with your mates. I remember, you know, certain black players would become, and, you know, they'd start with a monkey chant. I remember it myself, I was doing it, you know, I was going along with it, and, you know, you black this and everything else. Never ever sort of acknowledged to me, you know, that I was doing anything particularly wrong.
The attitude that prevailed then was, you know, it was fun. You know, I was called Paddy, Mick or whatever, and, you know, the lads would take the mick out of me. But I think looking back now, the more hurtful thing was, you know, we'd call the other guys names. And it was everyday life, and it was just, you know, it was accepted, and not very proud that I was in that environment, not very proud that I didn't stand up straight away and object to it. I played along with it, as most people did at that time.
I was one of the few black players in the side, and it stemmed from jokes from I suppose your colleagues that you were playing with, who thought at the time it was okay to crack jokes about, you know, blacks and, you know, different sort of like hidden stuff, where they'd crack a joke and say, like, you know, like the black players didn't like the cold and this, that and the other, you know. So when you think back, there was a lot of hidden jokes but serious connotations in there.
And it wasn't until, you know, I got into football myself and started, you know, meeting fellow black players, and I think it was in England in the 15s. You know, I finished up rooming with a lad called Darren Beckford, and you know, Beresford. So they put us together. It was alphabetical, and you know, we're messing around in a room, and he said something, and I turned and I called him a black so and so, bit in just in messing around, and his face just dropped, and I was like, "What's up with you?" He went, "You know, you're a racist." I went, "What are you on about? I'm a racist." And then he started to explain. And then when I says, come on, it was just a comment. He says, "No," he says, and then he explained, he says, "Look, Bez," he says, "yeah, you're not a racist as such, but you're condoning it by calling me that."
When I played at Newcastle in 1985, me and Howard Gale were subjected to some racial abuse. We got sent off in the game as well. But, you know, what did stand out is that there was fruit which was sold outside the game on the day, and it was obviously aimed at me and Howard because we were black.
It's all credit to the players, basically, the ones who the chants were against, how they showed the professionalism they did just to carry on playing the game. I mean, if I'd experienced that myself, I don't know what sort of reaction there would be from myself personally, but, you know, all credit to the players.
It wasn't that all fans were racist, but racism had become ingrained in football. It was left largely unchallenged by the footballing authorities and the media. It was very hard for fans to tackle racism at games. There were no laws against racist chanting, and it was ignored by the stewards and the police. Even programmes like Match of the Day never mentioned racism, and black players continued to suffer from racist abuse for over 20 years.
It was on such a mass scale that you were terrified to do anything, at least I was, as an individual. And the campaigns really came after that. So, you know, it was much more the case that it was, if you were an anti-racist, you just kept quiet. If you're a racist, you either laughed along or joined in on it.
The Yobs hooligans, they targeted everything, other fans, but particularly because there were more black players, they targeted black players and chanted racist remarks, were abusive, and it was generally out of control. There were no checks and balances.
I was at a game with one of my friends. I was only about 14, and he managed to get some tickets. We were sitting there, and the game was going on. There were some black players on one of the teams, the away team, and there was a guy in front shouting loads of racist comments and stuff, "Go back to where you're from," and making noises and stuff like that. And I was sitting there, and I was only like 13, 14, and I was just thinking, what's going on? There was a policeman standing like 2 yards to my left. So I've looked up and said, as if to say, like, what's going on? He looked at me and kind of just looked right through me and carried on watching the game kind of thing. And I thought, he can hear it, I can hear it, what's he going to do? Something happened and he started shouting again. He stood up and he turned around and he went, you're right, mate, it's just them ones on the pitch kind of thing. And I was like, come on, like, I just got up and left. I looked at the policeman, shook my head and just got off and left the ground.
I was in the petrol station just opposite St James's. My wife was in the car, was filling up, and 4 young kids, I couldn't have been more than 12 or 13 years old, started shouting racial abuse to me from across the street, and you know, it got pretty nasty. Then all of a sudden, one kid, you know, just stopped and said, "Hold on a minute, that's Shaka Hislop." And they all come running over for autographs, you know, and I mean, I was very taken aback by it. I was hurt in a way that I probably don't care to remember right now.
People were making a lot of excuses for it. People were saying they were coming out with things like, you get called a black this, I get called a fat that, or I get called a ginger this, or whatever. And I would say, well, hang on, you weren't persecuted because you're ginger here. You weren't persecuted because you was fat. People got persecuted because they were black. So the connotations that come with calling someone a black this or black that far outweigh the connotations in calling someone fat or calling someone ginger haired. And you know, even now, you know, not everybody's views have changed.
I've changed a lot of them have changed, but not every single person's views changed, and that's the whole thing with football. It's not about coming to a football ground. It's about the problem that's in society itself.
Towards the end of the 1980s, things did begin to improve.
There's a number of factors that all came together, and the factors were the anti-racist campaigns of fans, which have been ongoing throughout the 70s, the involvement of black players in those campaigns, but also the much bigger involvement of black players in football itself.
It kind of embarrassed a lot of the people in the supporters when they're actually doing monkey chants to somebody in the other team when they've got a black player in their own team and he's kind of condescending, and you could see the kind of supporters thinking, hang on a bit, this is not really adding up.
The key factor in terms of, certainly as a Newcastle fan, was Andy Cole. He was your #1 player and he was black. That had a huge impact in terms of people then having the confidence to say, when you got racist abuse, shut up, Andy Cole's, one of ours, he's a black player. So there's much more challenging when you have the confidence to have somebody like Cole in your side.
Down the years, from the days when Brendan Batson, Viv Anderson, then John Barnes later, Incy, Wrighty and people were playing, it's gone down slowly and slowly. I remember the days when it was a very big moment when I was younger to see at the John Barnes back here a banana that was thrown at him. And the young guys on my state was like, oh, do you see what he done with a banana, man? That's just like kicking it back in their face kind of thing.
In the 1990s, government and the football authorities finally began to take the problem seriously. The Football Offences Act made racist chanting illegal, and improvements in stadia and stewarding made it much easier to pinpoint people shouting racist abuse. And the Commission for Racial Equality and the Professional Footballers Association started Kick It Out, the first national campaign against racism in football.
It was an embracing of the philosophy behind the campaign. The players supported it, obviously 100%. Campaigns like yourselves, it was a fantastic response and a very heartwarming one, and it shows the benefits because stadiums now are much more inviting places. Families are back, watching the game, and it's changed the whole atmosphere within a stadium because that was really probably the worst sort of antisocial behaviour you could have. I mean, I set aside the violence aspect. But in terms of going along to a game with the intention of just abusing and verbally abusing black players was absolutely disgusting.
Once they brought in some legislation, once people were aware of what was going on, then, they started to control it. And you have to be relentless. Even now, I think you have to be relentless. You have to be totally intolerant about it. You don't tolerate that sort of behaviour, that abusive, racist behaviour. Football is about the quality of football that a person plays. It's not about his colour, his race, his culture.
One of the most important developments was the involvement of players as role models, working with campaigns against racism.
You now had football answering the community when the community had problems. So instead of it being the other way around and football being, the cause of this thing where there's so much of this culture in place, this racist culture, where now you have a completely different situation where now actually the message is going from football into the schools.
We felt that the main job of Shirts and Red Card, right from the word go, was to tackle racism in society, not in football. And that was the message we started with. And the first place we took the players in to was Westgate Community College. And we realised then that young people would listen and learn from top players in a role model status that, and in a way that you're not going to get with other people.
For obvious reasons, I'm one of the few black goalkeepers in England and therefore subject to racist comments and different racist chants. And I can't run away from it. I have to stand there and take it. It's something that hurts very deeply and something that I feel very strongly about.
It got easier, it got better with education, with talking about it, with raising the debates, with trying to rationalise why people said things, why people had the differences they had. So I think it's very, very important that youngsters at a very early age have this discussion to talk about black and white and Muslims and Jews and Christians. It's very, very, very important. And there's no reason why people cannot live together but hold their cultures dear to them. Absolutely no reason why that can't happen. But I think it's important that people have the debate and understand differences, understand that people like to go to mosque as opposed to go to a church. Nothing wrong with that. It's understanding people's cultures.
Whilst things have improved a great deal in the UK, across Europe, racism still remains a problem in football.
We should be recounting how well the 5,000 or so England fans conducted themselves in Madrid, but the actions of some of the Spanish crowds towards England's black players has dominated events.
Oh, that's dreadful, the way they're shouting every time Sean Wright-Phillips gets anywhere near the ball.
In this day and age, playing in the Bernabeu Stadium in Spain, a cosmopolitan country, so you think, and the sounds and noises that we're hearing is just unbelievable, to be honest. I couldn't believe it.
I had some bad experience at times on the pitch. Always, I have to say, always with fans, never with players. Pretty difficult sometimes because you have to keep cool and make sure you can keep your mind in the game and not do something stupid.
Dans les qualifications du championnat d'Europe.
During the European Championship qualifiers, there was a big banner which drew attention to the fact that there were a lot of black players in the France side. And it said, France is Africa, with some racist words on it. But I think the best thing to do with racism is to try and explain why it exists, and is still with us today.
Samuel Eto'o was ready to walk off after receiving racist abuse from fans.
Well, the referee's had a word with the stadium manager, it would appear, and something's happened. Something being thrown at Samuel Eto'o. Or...
No mas, he's saying, no more.
Or was it verbal comments emanating from the crowd behind that goal?
I think so, Kevin. No mas, no more.
Once I nearly walked off the pitch. But after thinking about it, no, actually not after thinking about it, but with the help of the referee and my colleagues, in the end we finished the match. But it was quite hard to put up with it. People often don't realize what you might be feeling. It's tough.
It's sad that the situation came for him to reach that level of leaving the pitch, leaving his teammates, leaving the game that he loves, but what else do you do? That's how I saw it. When I was there, I said, people were saying, yeah, you shouldn't leave. I said, yes, it's a fair, point to argue, but what do you do?
Some Eastern Bloc countries as well that I've been to, you hear noises coming out of the grounds of the fans. Maybe they don't see as many black people as we do in England. It's not as multicultural as it is in England. I don't know what the reason is. Obviously, it goes beyond football and it's more society. But football is a great tool to use to combat racism, and I think that it needs to be used a lot more.
So although the problem hasn't gone away, the beautiful game is now a key player in the fight against racism.
Players are now involved in anti-racist campaigns, using their role model status in the fight against racism, and using football as an example of how people from different cultures and backgrounds can work together.
As players, we are all well together. We are all together wherever you come from, whatever your colour is, whatever is your religion. We never had a problem of racist inside the dressing room. And it should be the same for people as well, for the supporters and for people around the game, to be the same, to see how the players they are together. I'm very glad that we are, as players, we could reach that level of maturity and of thinking.
I always think that football is an ambassador sport. Is something will always unite people to fight against war, against racism, and all these kind of things. Because football is a collective sport, so you need to play with your mate. So you need to accept the fact that he can be black, he can be yellow or white, and you have to play with him.
In football, I believe a lot more can be done. I'm not the person responsible for making these sorts of decisions, but I think it can be shown that football can become cleaner than it is now. It can always improve. That's what we in football, players and administrators, have to think about. That we can always improve our contribution to society.
que siempre podemos mejorar y siempre podemos traer nuestra contribución a la sociedad.
We had it really bad, and yet we showed that it can be defeated. When they said you'll never defeat hooliganism, well, you know, we've shown that that can happen. We've shown that the game can be a family game. It can be a game that we're proud of, and it can be a game where we want parents of young black players, young Asian players, regardless of their country, their culture, their background. It welcomes everybody. And that is the true meaning of a football family.
We've come a long way from the dark days of the 1970s and 80s, and we've seen that football can make a major contribution to society in the fight against racism. But there are still questions to be answered. Where are the black managers? Where are the Asian players? Why are there no black faces in the boardrooms of English football? These issues need to be addressed before we can finally say that racism is no longer part of the beautiful game.